The streets are empty, but they do not look conquered. That is the first strange thing. No blackened palace stands at the centre. No shattered royal gate tells of an army breaking through. No carved monument boasts that one king crushed another beneath his chariot wheels. The city lies under the sun in baked brick and dust, its walls lowered by time, its wells choked with earth, its drains silent after thousands of years. Once water moved here with purpose. Once feet crossed these lanes in the heat of morning. Once someone opened a door, carried grain washed in a courtyard, pressed a seal into wet clay, and trusted that tomorrow would arrive much like yesterday. Then slowly that trust failed. Across the plains of what are now Pakistan and northwest India, the remains of the Indus Civilization stretch farther than many ancient worlds people know by name. Its settlements once reached from the mountains near Afghanistan to the plains of Gujarat, from the edge of the Iranian plateau toward the old courses of rivers that no longer flow as they once did. In its mature centuries, roughly between 2600 and 1900 BCE, this civilization builds some of the most carefully planned cities of the Bronze Age. Mohenjo-Daro rises near the Indus River. Harappa stands farther north. Dholavira watches a dry island landscape in the salt flats of Kutch. Ganariwala Rakhigarhi, Lothal Kalibangan, and hundreds of smaller places form a web of towns, villages, workshops, ports, fields, wells, and roads. Yet when the great urban phase ends, it leaves behind no clear story of a final war. This is what makes the Indus mystery so unsettling. Civilizations often teach later ages how to imagine their endings. Egypt leaves kings and tombs, dynasties and inscriptions. Mesopotamia leaves tablets filled with accounts, laws, hymns, quarrels and disasters. The Hittites leave the memory of burning cities and broken diplomacy. Rome leaves too many explanations, almost a civilization of explanations. But the Indus world is quieter. Its writing survives in hundreds and thousands of tiny marks on seals, tablets, pottery tools and ornaments. Yet those marks still do not speak in a language scholars can confidently read. Its cities are vast, but their rulers remain hidden. Its order is obvious, but its authority is obscure. Its decline is visible, but its final cause is not. The old image of a civilization destroyed by invaders has faded. For a time, some archaeologists imagined sudden violence outsiders sweeping into the cities, slaughter in the streets, a Bronze Age tragedy, written in broken skeletons and ruined walls. But the evidence does not fit that simple picture. The bodies once used to support dramatic claims do not prove a city-wide massacre. There are no widespread layers of destruction across the major sites that announce a single, catastrophic conquest. Weapons do not dominate the record. Fortifications, where they exist, do not tell a clean story of siege and collapse. Scholars still debate many details, but the broad shape has changed. The Indus Civilization did not disappear because one army arrived and ended it in fire. Instead, the mystery is slower and in some ways more haunting. A city can be destroyed in a day, but an urban world can also be unmade by seasons. A river can shift. A monsoon can weaken. Trade can thin. Fields can become less reliable. Wells can deepen. Floods can arrive too often in one place and fail in another. Families can decide not to rebuild a house after the wall cracks again. Craftspeople can leave a neighborhood. Merchants can travel shorter routes. A city can remain standing while the reasons for living in it begin to loosen one by one. To understand the disappearance of the Indus Civilization, it is necessary to begin not with an ending, but with the landscape that made the civilization possible. The Indus Plains are not a gentle backdrop. They are active, restless, powerful. Rivers carry snowmelt from the Himalayas and monsoon rain from the skies. They flood deposit silt, change course, abandon channels, and carve new ones. In one generation, a riverbank can be a blessing. In another, it can become a danger. Farmers depend on water, but too much water can bury fields and streets. Too little can turn stored grain into a measure of fear. What survives in the record suggests that Indus people understood this world with extraordinary skill. They built wells by the thousands, laid drains with careful gradients, raised platforms, managed reservoirs, and placed settlements where waterland trade and craft could meet. Yet their success may have tied them to systems that were changing beneath them. The rivers that fed fields and cities were not fixed lines on a map. The monsoon that helped sustain agriculture was not a constant promise. Over centuries, environmental evidence points toward shifts in rainfall and hydrology across parts of the Indus region. The great urban centres do not all fail at once, and they do not all fail in the same way. Some decline, some shrink, some are abandoned, some continue in altered form. New settlements appear elsewhere, often smaller, often more rural, often farther east, or into zones where different farming strategies make better sense. No single explanation fully accounts for this, but the pattern suggests transformation rather than instant erasure. The silence of the ruins can be misleading. It is tempting to imagine the last days as empty streets, dust blowing through abandoned doorways, a final family walking away from a dying city. That may have happened in some places at some moments, but disappearance on this scale is rarely so clean. The Indus people did not simply vanish into air. Their descendants lived on. Their practices, crops, animals, crafts, roots, and memories moved into later cultures in ways that are difficult to trace with certainty. The urban system disappeared. The people did not. That difference matters. A civilization can die as a political and urban form, while its human substance continues scattered into villages, blended into new regions, reshaped by new pressures, and eventually hidden beneath later histories. Still, a loss is real. Something enormous ends. The standard bricks stop being used with the old consistency. The seal tradition fades. Long-distance exchange changes. The great cities no longer organize life as they once did. The shared habits that made a vast region feel connected begin to dissolve. The Indus script, already brief and mysterious, falls silent without leaving a translated farewell. It is as if a whole world lowers its voice until later generations can only see the movement of its hands. In the ruins, details remain with almost painful intimacy. A beadmaker's workshop, a carefully lined drain, a bathing platform, a jar set into a floor, a street corner worn by use, a well rebuilt again and again as the city rose on its own debris. These are not the traces of a primitive or accidental society. They are the remains of people who valued order, cleanliness, measurement, craft, and repetition. Their cities seem less obsessed with glorifying rulers than with making daily life function. That may be one of the reasons their disappearance feels so modern. They are not distant only because they are ancient. They are familiar because they built systems, depended on infrastructure, trusted networks, and lived within an environment they could manage but never fully control. So the story begins in a paradox. One of the largest civilizations of the ancient world ends without leaving the kind of ending we expect. No triumphant enemy explains it. No readable chronicle mourns it. No single disaster closes the door. The Indus Civilization disappears without war, or at least without war as the main visible cause, and what remains is a deeper question about how complex societies fail when the foundations beneath them shift slowly enough that no one day looks like the end. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because the road into the Indus world does not lead first to ruin, but to achievement, to cities planned with astonishing care, to streets laid in grids, to standardized weights, to merchants who crossed seas, and to a civilization that managed to become vast without leaving behind the usual monuments of kings. The mystery of its disappearance begins with the mystery of how it held together at all. The Indus world rises with a strange kind of confidence. It does not announce itself through colossal statues of rulers or carved scenes of kings smiting enemies. It does not cover its walls with long boasts of conquest. It does not seem eager to tell later ages the names of its founders. Instead, it leaves behind something quieter and more difficult to fake order, repeated across distance. A brick made to familiar proportions, a drain built with the same practical intelligence as another drain hundreds of miles away. A weight shaped to a shared standard, a seal cut with a careful animal form and a few brief signs, a city street aligned with a plan rather than grown entirely by accident. This is the signature of the Indus civilization at its height, not a shout from a throne, but a pattern in everyday life. Before the great cities reach their mature form, the region is already full of long development. Farming communities have lived in parts of the northwest for thousands of years. At places such as Mehrgarh near the Bolan Pass, early villagers cultivate crops, herd animals, make pottery shape ornaments, and take part in exchange networks that connect mountains, plains, and distant resources. Over time, settlements grow more complex. Local traditions overlap. Techniques improve. Villages become towns. Craft production becomes more specialized. By the time the mature Indus phase emerges, the civilization does not appear from nowhere. It is the result of centuries of experiment, adaptation, and accumulation. Though the evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate exactly how different regional cultures fused into one wider urban system. What makes that system remarkable is not merely its size, though its size is astonishing. The Indus sphere covers an area larger than Egypt or Mesopotamia at many points in their Bronze Age histories. What makes it truly unusual is the degree of shared practice across that vast space. The famous baked bricks often follow a ratio of 1:4, a practical proportion that appears again and again in major sites. Weights made of stone follow carefully graded systems, allowing goods to be measured in ways merchants and administrators could trust. Seals carry recurring motifs: powerful bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, water buffalo composite, or debated creatures, and short inscriptions whose meaning is still locked away. Pottery styles, bead forms, shell ornaments, copper tools, and urban layouts show both regional variation and a larger cultural grammar. This wide consistency implies coordination, yet the visible machinery of power is hard to find. In Egypt, authority rises in pyramids and royal tombs. In Mesopotamia, temples and palaces dominate city centers, and tablets name officials, kings, gods, and grain rations. In the Indus cities, archaeologists have found large buildings, raised platforms, possible assembly spaces, granary-like structures, and public works, but not the unmistakable palace of a divine king. No royal tomb has emerged filled with gold weapons and sacrificed retainers. No giant statue of a ruler stares across a court. This does not mean the Indus people had no hierarchy. A civilization of such scale almost certainly had social differences: specialists, managers, elders, merchants, landholders, ritual authorities, or other forms of influence. But their power was expressed differently, or at least preserved differently. That difference is one of the civilization's deepest puzzles. How does a society coordinate brick sizes, weights, trade practices, city planning, and water systems across so much territory without leaving obvious royal propaganda? One possibility is that authority was distributed among councils, merchant groups, kin networks, priestly or ritual specialists, and local elites, rather than concentrated in kings who demanded monumental self-display. Another is that palaces and temples existed in forms archaeologists have not recognized, perhaps, because they were built less ostentatiously, or because Indus symbols of power do not match expectations formed from Egypt and Mesopotamia. No single answer is secure. What survives in the record suggests a society capable of organization without the usual loud evidence of monarchy. The cities themselves embody this restrained power. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are not random clusters of houses pressed against a royal compound. They are planned environments with major streets, smaller lanes, drainage systems, wells, platforms, and neighborhoods that show long attention to function. The city is not a machine exactly, because real cities are always messy, repaired, rebuilt, and argued over. But the Indus city has an unmistakable civic logic. Houses often turn inward around courtyards. Many have bathing areas. Wastewater moves through drains, sometimes covered with baked brick or stone slabs. Wells are common to an extraordinary degree, especially at Mohenjo-Daro, where private and public water access appears deeply woven into urban life. Cleanliness, or at least controlled water use, seems not like a luxury for a few, but a principle built into the city's bones. This is one of the lesser-known surprises of the Indus world. Its monuments are often not monuments in the usual sense. The drain the well, the standardized brick, the raised street, the carefully managed platform, these are its statements. A visitor expecting temples and royal statues may overlook the true ambition of the place. It is not trying to overwhelm the eye with height. It is trying to make dense settlement workable in a demanding environment. There is grandeur here, but it lies in maintenance. It lies in the repeated labor of masons, planners, potters, water carriers, sweepers, merchants and households who accept a common system and keep it functioning over generations. Daily life inside this world is easier to sense than its politics. In the morning, smoke lifts from hearths, grain is ground, cattle and water buffalo shift in the heat. Craftspeople drill carnelian beads with astonishing precision, using techniques that require patience and skill. Shell arrives from coastal zones and becomes bangles or inlays. Copper and bronze tools pass through workshops. Cotton, one of the great gifts associated with South Asia, is spun and woven, though cloth rarely survives except in faint traces and impressions. Children move through courtyards. Traders weigh goods. Someone seals a bundle with clay, pressing an engraved stone seal into the soft surface before it dries. The seal mark says something recognizable to those who handle it, perhaps a name, title, institution, lineage, deity, or commodity, though scholars still debate the script's nature and language. Food anchors the civilization as surely as brick. Wheat and barley are important in many regions, while pulses, sesame, dates, and other crops appear in the archaeobotanical record. In some areas, especially later and farther east or south, millets and rice become more significant. Cattle are central not only as meat or milk sources, but as traction animals, wealth, and symbols. The great humped zebu bull appears repeatedly in Indus imagery, powerful and controlled, its body turned into a sign of strength. Yet even here uncertainty remains. The animal images may reflect economy, ritual, identity, or myth, and without readable texts their full meaning stays beyond reach. The Indus civilization is sometimes described as peaceful, and there is some reason for caution around that word. Compared with many ancient societies, the evidence for large-scale warfare is limited. Weapons exist, but they do not dominate the archaeological record. Fortifications may have had many purposes: flood protection, social separation, display, defense, or control of movement. The absence of obvious war monuments is striking, but no complex society of this size should be imagined as free of conflict. There may have been disputes, violence raids, rivalries, inequality and coercion that leave only faint traces. What can be said more safely is that the mature Indus world does not present itself through the imagery of organised violence. Its surviving face is administrative, mercantile, practical and civic. That civic face may be why its later decline is so difficult to interpret. If a civilization is built around a king, the fall of the king gives historians a dramatic handle. If it is built around temples, the burning of temples becomes a sign. If it is built around written bureaucracy, the last tablet can preserve a crisis. But if a civilization is built around systems so deeply embedded in daily life that no single ruler stands for the whole, its ending may be harder to see. The Indus world may have been resilient because power and practice were spread widely. Yet that same structure may have made its collapse diffuse, gradual and quiet. At its height, nothing about this civilization suggests fragility at first glance. Its cities are large, its crafts are refined, its standards are stable, its trade reaches far, its water systems are sophisticated, its people have turned a challenging landscape into one of the great urban experiments of the ancient world. But all of this depends on continuity. Reliable enough harvests, navigable enough routes, shared enough beliefs, trusted enough measures, stable enough river behavior and institutions capable of keeping distant communities aligned. The Indus civilization does not need a conquering army to become vulnerable. It only needs the slow weakening of the conditions that make its order worth preserving, and so the absence of kings becomes more than a curiosity. It becomes part of the central mystery. A civilization that hides its rulers also hides the exact mechanisms by which it responded to crisis. When rains changed, who decided where grain moved? When rivers shifted, who organized repair or relocation? When trade weakened, who absorbed the loss? When a city neighborhood flooded again, who commanded rebuilding and who simply left? The bricks remain. The drains remain, the weights remain. But the decision-makers have stepped out of the record, leaving only the pattern of what they once maintained. The Indus civilization is born from water, but not from water that behaves gently. Its world is made by rivers with mountain memories, rivers that begin far away in snow and stone, gather force through deep valleys spread across plains, and then change the lives of people who may never see the glaciers that feed them. The Indus itself is not simply a line of blue on a map. It is a moving engine of silt, flood, fertility, danger and renewal. Around it lie tributaries, seasonal channels, old riverbeds, marshes, lakes and plains, where the difference between abundance and failure can be measured in the timing of rain. To live here in the Bronze Age is to negotiate with water every year, and the Indus people seem to have done this with extraordinary patience. In Egypt, the Nile offers a kind of narrow certainty, not perfect, but regular enough to shape a civilization around predictable flood cycles. In Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates are more temperamental, and irrigation becomes a great political and agricultural challenge. The Indus region is different again. It is wider, more varied and tied to several water systems at once. Snowmelt matters in some areas, monsoon rainfall matters in others, seasonal streams swell and vanish, rivers migrate across broad alluvial plains. Floods can enrich a field one year and erase a settlement the next. Drought can arrive not as a single disaster, but as a pattern of weaker rains and thinner harvests. The evidence remains incomplete, but it is clear that Indus urbanism grows in a landscape where water is both the foundation and the threat. This is why the famous drains and wells are not minor details. They are not simply conveniences. They are expressions of a civilization thinking constantly about water. In Mohenjo-Daro, wells are so numerous that some neighborhoods seem almost saturated with access points. Many houses have bathing platforms made of brick with wastewater channels leading into covered drains. The drains do not always work perfectly, and they require cleaning, maintenance and rebuilding, but their presence reveals a shared expectation. Water should be brought in, used, controlled and carried away. In a dense city under a hot sky, that expectation is transformative. It reduces filth, supports craft work, allows bathing, helps households function, and gives daily life a rhythm of washing and disposal that feels unusually systematic for the ancient world. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, often described as one of the most iconic structures of the Indus Civilization, shows this logic in a more formal and possibly ritual form. It is a large brick-lined tank carefully waterproofed set within a raised complex. Steps descend into it. Rooms surround it. Water could be filled and drained with deliberate care. Scholars still debate its exact purpose. It may have been used for ritual bathing purification, elite gatherings, communal ceremonies, or some combination of social and religious acts that cannot be reconstructed with certainty. But whatever its meaning, it shows that controlled water has symbolic power as well as practical value. In the Indus world, water is not only something that sustains crops, it is something that structures bodies, houses, streets, and perhaps ideas of order itself. Beyond the cities, water determines the shape of farming. The Indus people grow wheat and barley in many regions, crops suited to winter cultivation, in areas where moisture and soil conditions allow. They also use pulses, oilseeds, and eventually more diverse crops depending on region and period. Agriculture is not uniform across the civilization. In some places, farmers may depend heavily on floodplain moisture left by receding waters. In others, they use rainfall, small-scale irrigation wells, or seasonal streams. There is no single Indus farming system, and that diversity may have been a strength. A civilization spread across varied ecological zones can survive local failure better than one tied to a single narrow pattern. Yet diversity also means complexity. It requires knowledge of many landscapes and coordination across regions whose risks are not identical. One lesser-known feature of the Indus world is how much of its success may have depended on living with floods rather than simply preventing them. At Mohenjo-Daro, the city rises over time on layers of rebuilding, with streets and platforms adjusted as floods deposit silt and damage structures. In some areas, massive brick platforms may have helped raise important parts of the settlement above flood levels. This does not mean the city was perfectly safe. It means people expected trouble and rebuilt with it in mind. Floods were not rare interruptions. They were part of the environmental conversation. The city's life included repair, elevation, cleaning, and adaptation. The same river that supports agriculture can also undermine walls, contaminate wells, and force neighborhoods to be remade. In Dolavira, far to the southwest in the arid landscape of Kutch, the water story becomes even more striking. There the city stands in a place where rainfall is limited and seasonal streams must be captured carefully. The settlement includes an elaborate system of reservoirs, dams, channels, and stone-lined basins designed to store precious water. It is not a city casually placed beside endless abundance. It is a city that survives by harvesting scarcity. When rains arrive, water must be guided and kept. When dry months follow, stored water becomes the difference between endurance and abandonment. Dolavira shows that the Indus civilization is not merely a river civilization in the simple sense. It is a civilization of water management across extremes. This range of adaptation helps explain why the Indus world becomes so large. It is not locked into one royal valley or one irrigation scheme. It spreads through river plains, semi-arid zones, coastal settlements, and trade corridors. It links highland resources to lowland cities, inland farms to maritime exchange, wet zones to dry ones. Its people know how to build with baked brick where flood and moisture demand it, how to use mud brick where conditions allow, how to dig wells, how to plan drains, how to store water, how to farm according to local rhythms. Their civilization is not a simple monument placed on the land. It is a long negotiation with the land's behavior, yet every negotiation has terms and the terms can change. The very skills that make Indus life possible also reveal its exposure. If the rivers shift too far, settlements lose their advantages. If floods become too destructive, rebuilding becomes exhausting. If rainfall weakens across generations, farming patterns must change. If reservoirs no longer fill reliably arid cities, face hard choices. If old channels dry or become seasonal, the settlements near them may no longer support dense populations. No single explanation fully accounts for the later decline, but the water systems that once strengthened the civilization become central to understanding its vulnerability. This does not mean the Indus people were helpless before nature. That would badly underestimate them. They were among the great environmental managers of the Bronze Age. Their wells, drains, platforms, reservoirs, and settlement choices show deep technical and social knowledge. But technical knowledge does not make a civilization immune to long-term climate variation or river reorganization. It only gives people more ways to respond. Sometimes those responses preserve a city. Sometimes they buy time. Sometimes they lead people to transform their lives so completely that the old urban pattern fades. The logic of water also helps explain why the end was uneven. A drought does not strike every field in the same way. A river shift ruins one route while improving another. A flood destroys one neighborhood and leaves another repairable. A weakening monsoon might hurt some crops but encourage others in different regions. This creates not one dramatic collapse but a mosaic of pressures. Some cities struggle earlier, some villages adapt, some communities move, some traditions persist in altered form. The Indus world does not fall like a tower. It loosens like a woven cloth pulled by many damp and drying threads. At the civilization's height, however, the cloth still holds. Water runs through streets, fields, wells, reservoirs as ritual spaces. It carries grain into storage clay, into brick, silt, into fields, goods along routes and people into cities that seem built to endure. The Indus people have learned how to live with rivers that wander and rains that cannot be commanded. For a time, that knowledge is enough. It allows urban life to flourish in one of the most dynamic landscapes of the ancient world. But beneath the prosperity is a quiet dependency that no seal, brick, or drain can escape. The civilization's strength flows through water, and so eventually does its mystery. At its height, Mohenjo-Daro does not need to glitter to be impressive. Its power is in the way it works. Under the hard sun of the lower Indus plain, the city rises from baked brick, not as a single monument, but as an immense arrangement of streets, platforms, wells, walls, courtyards, drains, rooms, and thresholds. From a distance it may have looked less like the shining fantasy of an ancient capital, and more like a broad reddish-brown mass lifted above the floodplain, practical and deliberate, its surfaces catching light, its rooftops flat, its lanes alive with heat and movement. The Indus River runs nearby, not exactly obedient, never truly still, carrying silt and possibility, through a landscape that can feed a city and threaten it in the same season. To walk through Mohenjo-Daro in imagination is to notice how rarely the city behaves like the ancient capitals people are trained to expect. There is no obvious royal avenue leading to a palace where a king's name is carved in stone. There is no pyramid, no colossal ruler, no great battle relief showing captives dragged by the hair. Instead, there are streets meeting at planned angles, smaller lanes slipping between houses, wells built with ring after ring of brick bathing rooms, tucked into domestic spaces, and drains that run beneath or beside the roads. It is a city of arrangements. Its drama lies not in spectacle, but in repetition. A household draws water, someone washes, wastewater moves away, a mason repairs a wall, a potter shapes clay, a seal cutter bends over stone, a bead maker drills carnelian with a precision that seems almost impossible without seeing the tools in motion. The city is usually described in two broad parts, a raised western mound often called the citadel, and a larger lower town, though even those labels can mislead. The so-called citadel is not necessarily a fortress in the simple military sense, and scholars still debate the exact functions of its large buildings. It is raised massive and important, but its meaning is not transparent. There stands the great bath, brick-lined and carefully sealed with steps descending into a tank that must once have held water like a dark mirror. Around it are rooms, passages and walls suggesting controlled access and repeated use. Nearby structures have been interpreted in different ways over the years: granary, assembly hall, college, administrative building, ritual complex. Some older labels may say more about early archaeological expectations than about Indus reality. The evidence remains incomplete, and the city does not easily translate itself into familiar categories. That uncertainty is part of the fascination. Mohenjo-Daro is one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world, yet it still resists simple explanation. The Great Bath feels important, but no inscription tells exactly who entered it, on what days, under whose authority, and for what purpose. The large pillared hall suggests gathering or storage or administration, but the specific acts performed inside it are gone. Buildings that once held social meaning now survive as plans of walls. The city offers architecture without captions. It is like seeing the skeleton of an institution without knowing its name. In the lower town, the mystery becomes more intimate. Houses vary in size, suggesting differences in wealth or status, but many share basic principles. They often open onto side lanes rather than the main street, preserving privacy. Rooms cluster around courtyards where light and air can enter. Stairways imply upper stories. Bathing platforms appear again and again, sometimes with sloped floors, leading wastewater into drains. Latrine-like features have been identified in some houses, though details vary and interpretation can be cautious. Wells are everywhere, some private, some shared, built from wedge-shaped bricks that form strong circular shafts. In a hot city of thousands, this level of water access is not a small achievement. It means that daily cleanliness, craft production, cooking and household routines depend on infrastructure that must be built, maintained, and socially accepted. A lesser-known detail is that Mohenjo-Daro was not simply built once, and then inhabited unchanged. It rose through time. Streets were resurfaced, walls were rebuilt, drains were repaired or replaced, houses were modified. Flood deposits and rebuilding episodes lifted parts of the city higher, as though Mohenjo-Daro kept climbing slowly over its own past. This is one of the reasons the ruins feel layered rather than frozen. The city was not a perfect plan imposed forever in a single moment. It was a living organism of brick constantly adjusted to where water crowding decay and need. Its order was not effortless. It had to be renewed. That renewal required labour. Someone had to bake bricks in enormous quantities, consuming fuel and organising production. Someone had to quarry or gather raw materials. Someone had to clear drains when silt and waste clogged them. Someone had to rebuild wells as street levels rose. Someone had to decide which walls could be repaired and which houses would be abandoned. The visible neatness of the city hides all the work that kept it from becoming unlivable. This is where Mohenjo-Daro becomes most human. Its civilization is not only in its design but in its maintenance. Every functioning drain is a promise kept by people whose names are lost. The city's crafts reveal another kind of sophistication. Indus artisans produce beads of carnelian agate steatite faience shell and other materials, some requiring heating, polishing, drilling, and specialized knowledge. Tiny steatite seals are carved with animals and signs, then often fired or treated to harden and whiten them. Copper and bronze tools circulate, though stone tools remain common for many tasks. Pottery is shaped, painted, used, broken, discarded. Terracotta figurines appear, including animals, carts, and human forms, though their meanings are debated. Some may have been toys, ritual objects, household symbols, or things that do not fit any single modern category. The ordinary and the sacred may not have been as separate as later observers imagine. Mohenjo-Daro is also full of controlled anonymity. The people are everywhere in the traces, yet almost nowhere as individuals. There are no long biographies, no royal portraits with names, no tombs that allow one person to dominate the city's memory. Even burials compared with the monumental death cultures of Egypt or Mesopotamia are relatively restrained. This does not mean the Indus people lacked beliefs about death or status. It means those beliefs did not leave the same archaeological signature. Their city preserves life more vividly than death: bathing, cooking, crafting, storing, sealing, repairing, walking, drawing water. The dead do not rule the landscape the way they do beside the Nile. The famous so-called priest-king statue, small and broken, has often tempted people to imagine a ruler of Mohenjo-Daro. The figure wears a patterned garment and has a composed, heavy-lidded face. Yet even this object is uncertain. It may represent an elite, a ritual specialist, an ancestor, a deity, or something else entirely. The name priest-king is modern, not proven. It reveals the urge to place familiar authority into an unfamiliar civilization. Scholars still debate what such objects mean, and the safest conclusion is modest Indus society had people of importance, but archaeology has not yet shown a king in the way Egypt or Mesopotamia does. By late afternoon in this imagined city at its height, the brick walls hold the day's heat. A woman pours water across a bathing floor. A trader checks weights against a stone measure. A child rolls a small terracotta cart. A craftsman holds a bead to the light, judging its polish. Somewhere in the raised western mound, people gather near water whose meaning is no longer recoverable. Smoke thins above rooftops. The drains carry away the remains of ordinary life. Nothing in this scene looks like a civilization on the edge of disappearance. That is the quiet power of Mohenjo-Daro. Collapse is not visible from inside the moment of success, yet the signs of vulnerability are built into the same bricks. A city so dependent on maintenance can suffer when maintenance becomes harder. A city raised against floods can be worn down by floods that return too often. A city whose crafts and trade depend on networks can weaken when those networks shrink. A city that embodies shared standards can change when the reasons for those standards fade. Mohenjo-Daro at its height is not a doomed place, but it is a place held together by systems. Its greatness is real, and so is its dependence. The mystery of the Indus disappearance becomes sharper here because Mohenjo-Daro shows what was lost. Not merely buildings, not merely population. What fades is an entire way of organizing urban life around watercraft, privacy measurement, and civic habit. The city's silence is not empty. It is crowded with routines that once made sense. When those routines finally weaken, there may be no need for a conqueror to break the gates. The city can remain standing while the pattern inside it slowly comes undone. The Indus world does not end at the edge of its cities. Its streets, wells, and workshops are only the visible knots in a much larger net stretched across deserts, river plains, mountains, coasts, and open water. A bid drilled in one town may travel far beyond the place where the stone was polished. A shell taken from the Arabian Sea may become an ornament worn deep inland. A seal pressed into clay may mark a bundle moving between hands that never meet. Long before maps are drawn with firm borders, the Indus civilization lives through movement. Its people know routes, seasons, weights, materials, and the value of trust between distant places. Trade in the Indus world is not merely a matter of luxury. It is one of the ways the civilization holds itself together. Standardized weights, often made from chiert or other hard stone, appear across many sites in carefully graded units. Their precision suggests more than casual exchange. Goods are being measured according to shared expectations. Merchants, administrators, craft specialists, or household managers can weigh materials in ways others recognize. This matters in a world where writing remains brief and undeciphered. If the seals do not yet speak to modern scholars, the weights still speak in another language, the language of agreed value. Some Indus goods travel astonishing distances. In Mesopotamian texts, a distant land called Meluha appears, and many scholars associate it with the Indus region, though details remain debated. Mesopotamian records mention Meluhan ships, Meluhan people, and goods, such as wood, carnelian, ivory, and perhaps other valuable materials moving through Gulf trade. Archaeological finds strengthen this connection. Indus-style seals, etched carnelian beads, and other objects appear in Mesopotamian or Gulf contexts. Places such as Bahrain, known in ancient texts as Dilmun, and regions along the Oman Peninsula likely served as intermediaries between Mesopotamia and the Indus. The Bronze Age world was not isolated. It was connected by water wind risk and profit. Imagine a boat leaving an Indus coastal settlement, its cargo packed carefully, its timing shaped by currents and seasonal winds. The Arabian Sea is not an empty blue road. It is dangerous, changeable, and demanding. Sailors must know coastlines, harbours, shoals, storms, and the behaviour of the monsoon. They may hug the coast or cross parts of open water. They carry not only goods but information: which ports are safe, which rulers or merchants demand tribute, which materials bring the best return, which routes have become unreliable. A trade network is made of objects, but it is also made of memory. Lothal in Gujarat has often been linked to maritime trade because of its location, and a large brick-lined basin, interpreted by some as a dockyard, though scholars still debate the exact function of the structure. Whether it served as a dock reservoir or something more complex, the site clearly belongs to a region deeply connected with coastal and inland exchange. Gujarat offers access to shell, semi-precious stones, marine routes, and craft traditions. Dholavira too stand within a landscape that links inland movement to the salt flats and coastal worlds beyond. The Indus civilization is not only a river civilization, it is also a trading civilization of shores, passes, and caravan paths. The materials tell the story. Carnelian, a reddish-orange stone prized for its warmth and glow, is shaped into beads with remarkable skill. Some are long, elegant, and drilled with technical precision that would challenge careless hands even today. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan moves through broader exchange networks, as do metals, timber, shell, and stones. Copper may come from regions such as Rajasthan, Baluchistan, Oman, or other sources depending on site and period. Steatite is carved into seals. Faience, with its bright artificial surface, reveals chemical knowledge and aesthetic taste. Every object carries a geography. A necklace in a city may contain mountains, coasts, deserts, and workshops all at once. One lesser-known surprise is the presence of Indus-related individuals or communities beyond the Indus region itself. Mesopotamian references to Melohon interpreters suggest that language barriers mattered enough to require specialists. Some seals found in the Gulf combine local and Indus features, hinting at cultural mixing trade communities or adapted practices away from home. This is not simple one-way export. It is a world of contact zones where merchants, sailors, translators and craftspeople may live between identities. The Indus civilization may have been quiet in its own inscriptions, but abroad it left traces in the records of others. Yet trade also creates vulnerability. A city that depends partly on long-distance exchange can suffer when distant demand changes. If Mesopotamian politics shift, if Gulf routes become less profitable, if timber supplies decline, if maritime movement is disrupted, craft economies may feel the pressure. This does not mean trade collapse caused the Indus decline by itself. No single explanation fully accounts for that transformation. But the weakening of long-distance exchange likely formed one strand in the larger unravelling. When cities shrink and standards fade, the merchants and artisans who depended on broad networks may lose the conditions that supported their work. The seals offer a window into this world of movement and control. A typical Indus seal is small enough to fit in the hand, often square, often carved from steatite, with an animal figure and a short line of signs. The animal might be the famous so-called unicorn, a one-horned creature that appears so frequently it must have carried strong meaning, though its exact identity remains uncertain. It might be a bull-elephant, rhinoceros, tiger-goat, or composite form. The seal could be pressed into clay attached to a bundle jar door, or container marking ownership, origin, office, or ritual identity. Scholars still debate these functions, but the seal's role in administration or exchange seems likely. It gives authority to movement. It says in a language still hidden that this thing belongs within a recognized system. The standardized weights and seals together suggest a civilization that trusted regulation more than spectacle. Where another kingdom might carve a king's victories on stone, the Indus merchant or official standardizes measure and mark. This is not less sophisticated. In some ways it is more subtle. A shared system of weights can shape thousands of transactions without ever needing a monument. A seal can travel farther than a ruler's statue. A brick ratio can unify cities more quietly than a royal slogan. The Indus civilization seems to spread itself through habits of practice, making its identity portable. That portability may help explain both its success and its disappearance. A civilization whose core is embedded in standards, crafts and exchange can expand across varied landscapes without needing every settlement to look identical. But if those standards lose their usefulness, they can fade without a dramatic overthrow. A seal tradition can decline when the institutions behind sealing weaken. Weights can become less common when long-distance trade contracts or local economies change. Craft specialization can disperse when cities no longer support large workshops. The signs of decline are therefore not always spectacular. They appear as fewer marks, less uniformity, smaller networks, altered habits. At the height of trade, though, the Indus world seems wide awake. In a workshop, a bead is polished until it catches light like a small ember. In a courtyard, goods are weighed against stones that match a system known far beyond that house. Near a river landing, bundles are sealed and loaded. On a coastal route, sailors wait for favourable winds. In Mesopotamia, someone sees an object from Meluha and understands that it comes from a far place of value and skill. The Indus civilization is not isolated behind its riverbanks. It is part of a Bronze Age conversation that crosses languages and seas, and yet unlike Mesopotamia it does not leave long written accounts of this exchange. The goods travel more clearly than the words. Later ages can follow carnelian, shell, copper and seals, but not the voices of the people who negotiated their worth. This is one of the reasons the Indus mystery remains so powerful. The civilization reaches far enough to appear in foreign records, yet its own internal story remains sealed. Its trade routes prove connection, but its script denies confession. The world knew the Indus in fragments as Meluha or something like it. But the Indus people's own name for themselves, their cities and their homeland has vanished. As the story moves toward decline, those networks matter. Civilizations rarely collapse only from what happens inside their walls. They are also shaped by the weakening of distant ties. If rivers change, crops suffer. If crops suffer, surplus shrinks. If surplus shrinks, craft specialists may lose support. If trade thins, cities lose one of their reasons for concentration. If standards fade, shared identity becomes harder to maintain. The Indus world is a web, and a web does not need every strand to break at once. It begins with tension slackening and small failures far apart. For now, the web still holds. The seals are pressed, the weights balanced, the boats loaded, the workshops lit by late sun. But the same roots that make the civilization vast also make its silence larger. Somewhere beyond the Arabian Sea, a Mesopotamian scribe records a foreign land. Somewhere in the Indus plain, a seal cutter carves signs that no one today can read. Between them moves a civilization whose reach is unmistakable and whose voice remains just beyond hearing. The Indus script is one of the great locked doors of the ancient world. It appears close enough to writing to tempt the mind, yet distant enough to resist every confident key. Its signs sit on seals, tiny tablets, pottery, copper objects, tools, ornaments, and lumps of clay. They are brief, controlled and repeated with enough pattern to suggest meaning, but not enough length to surrender easily. In Egypt, a carved wall may tell a king's story. In Mesopotamia, a tablet may preserve a tax dispute, a hymn, a school exercise, or a complaint about bad copper. In the Indus world, the signs are usually short, often only a handful of symbols. They look like messages, but they refuse to become sentences. This silence shapes everything. Without a deciphered script, the Indus civilization must be understood through things. Bricks, drains, bones, seeds, beads, shells, metals, houses, streets, tools and landscapes. Archaeology can reveal patterns of diet, craft, trade, settlement, disease, climate and movement. But it cannot yet give the names people used for their cities, gods, offices, laws, ancestors or enemies. The people of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa may have told stories as rich as any Bronze Age society. They may have argued over inheritance, sung ritual songs, kept accounts, recited origin myths, and remembered floods in language filled with local meaning. But what survives in the record suggests only the outer skin of those words. The signs themselves are beautiful in their restraint. Some are simple strokes or shapes. Others resemble fish jars, plants, tridents, human-like forms, or abstract marks, though modern descriptions can mislead because a sign that looks like a fish to us may not have meant fish to them. A typical seal might show a powerful animal beneath or beside a line of signs. The so-called unicorn, that mysterious one-horned creature, appears again and again with a ritual-looking object before it. Bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, tigers, goats, and composite forms also appear. The combination of image and sign suggests identity, authority, ownership, institution, ritual or commodity, but the exact relationship remains debated. The problem is not that scholars have ignored the script. For more than a century, researchers have tried to decipher it. They have compared it to Dravidian languages, Indo-Aryan languages, Munda languages, and lost or unknown linguistic families. Some argue it represents a full writing system connected to speech. Others have suggested it may be a system of symbols, names, titles, or non-linguistic signs, though many specialists see enough structure to keep the writing hypothesis alive. Statistical studies have found patterns that resemble writing in some ways, yet the evidence remains incomplete. There is no bilingual inscription like the Rosetta Stone. There are no long royal texts. There are no school tablets repeating signs with known values. The script survives mostly in fragments too brief to force agreement. One lesser-known challenge is the direction and context of reading. Many inscriptions appear to have been written from right to left, suggested by sign spacing crowding, and the way certain marks are arranged, but not every object is simple. Seals create impressions in reverse, so the carved object and the stamped clay must be understood differently. Some signs vary by region or period. Some may be ligatures or combinations. Some inscriptions may mark individuals, others institutions, goods, rituals, or places. Every uncertainty multiplies the next. A sign cannot be translated until its sound or meaning is known, but its meaning may depend on the kind of object carrying it, and the object's function may depend on the sign. The brevity of the inscriptions also changes the nature of the mystery. If the signs were used mainly for administration sealing goods, naming persons, or marking controlled exchanges, then the Indus people may have written on perishable materials for longer texts. Palm leaves, cloth bark, wood leather, or other surfaces that have not survived in the floodplains and soils of the region. This is possible but unproven. It is tempting to imagine lost archives rooms once filled with records that decayed into nothing. The temptation is reasonable because many societies wrote on materials archaeology rarely preserves. But it remains inference. No single discovery has yet revealed a long Indus manuscript or a clay archive comparable to Mesopotamia's. This means that the Indus civilization may not have been as silent to itself as it is to us. Its silence is partly an accident of survival. Clay tablets baked by fire can last for millennia. Stone inscriptions endure. Papyrus can survive in dry deserts. But the Indus cities faced floods, rising groundwater salts, reuse erosion, and centuries of decay. Even the excavated remains suffer today from exposure and conservation challenges. What does not survive can distort the apparent character of a civilization. The Indus people may have written more than we know, but the land did not keep their words. Still, the surviving script tells us something important even without translation. Its distribution shows that symbols mattered across a wide region. Its signs are not random decoration. They were made carefully, often by skilled hands, and placed on objects involved in identity exchange or authority. The seal tradition implies recognition. A mark only works if others know how to read or respond to it. Even if most people could not read the signs, enough people must have understood them for the system to function. The script therefore belongs to the same world as weights and standardized bricks, a world of shared conventions. That shared convention deepens the question of governance. If seals marked merchants, officials, clans, temples, workshops, or administrative units, then they hint at institutions that archaeology cannot easily name. If the signs recorded personal names, then thousands of ancient identities survive in unread form. If they marked offerings or rituals, then the religious life of the Indus world is sitting in front of us, hidden by ignorance. Scholars still debate these possibilities, and caution is necessary. But the very existence of the script confirms that the Indus civilization had systems of meaning beyond simple barter or village custom. It also complicates the disappearance. When the mature urban phase declines, the script fades with it. This is one of the most important signs that the change was not merely a few cities shrinking. A symbolic system that once helped connect a vast civilization loses its role. Seals become less common. Standardized marks no longer circulate in the same way. The old script does not smoothly continue into long later inscriptions that can be read. Whatever institutions sustained it seemed to weaken or vanish. This does not mean the people forgot language, memory, or identity. It means the particular urban system that made those signs useful no longer held. The silence is especially painful because the Indus people lived at the edge of historical visibility. They were not prehistoric in the sense of lacking complex society. They built cities, traded across seas, standardized measures, and used signs. Yet because their script remains unread, they are often treated as half-hidden, suspended between archaeology and history. They are present in material evidence but absent from their own narrative. The result is a civilization that seems both familiar and unreachable. One can stand in a house, see the bathing floor, trace the drain, and understand the human need behind it. Then one can look at the signs on a seal and feel the distance return. Popular theories sometimes rush into this silence. They try to make the script prove modern identities, lost religions, secret wisdom, or dramatic migrations. Some claims are imaginative but unsupported. Others take one sign, one animal, or one supposed resemblance and build far more than the evidence can carry. The responsible path is slower. The Indus script may one day be deciphered perhaps through a longer inscription, a bilingual text, new computational work, or a breakthrough in a language identification. Or it may remain undeciphered for a long time. Until then, it must be treated as evidence of meaning, not permission for fantasy. The script's refusal to speak also changes how the Indus disappearance feels. If we could read a final tablet from Mohenjo-Daro, the story might seem less mysterious. It might tell of flood, famine, dispute, tax failure, migration, ritual change, or something no one expects. But no such farewell is known. Instead, the civilization's last urban centuries must be read through indirect signs, changing settlement patterns, altered crafts, declining standardization, environmental shifts, and the fading of long-distance exchange. The script which might have explained the crisis becomes itself part of the crisis. Its disappearance is one of the clues, and so the Indus signs remain small and stubborn, carrying their silence across 4,000 years. A seal sits in the hand no larger than a few fingers carved with an animal whose meaning is uncertain, and a line of marks that once needed no explanation. Someone understood it. Someone used it. Someone trusted that its impression would be recognized. That tiny object belonged to a world of rules, names, goods, and beliefs. Now it belongs to a mystery. The civilization did not leave a chronicle of its fall, but it left these compressed fragments of thought, each one a closed door in miniature, each one reminding us that the Indus world did not lack a voice. We simply have not learned how to hear it. Before a civilization visibly changes, it often begins by becoming slightly less itself. The signs are not always dramatic. A wall is repaired less carefully than before. A drain is blocked and not restored with the same precision. A craft tradition continues, but its finest examples grow rarer. A standard remains known, but local habits begin to return. A settlement is still occupied, yet its population is smaller, its streets less orderly, its old public structures no longer carrying the same authority. This is the kind of evidence that marks the Indus transition. Not a single day of ruin, not one universal layer of ash, but a gradual loosening of the patterns that once made the civilization feel so connected. In the mature centuries, the Indus world is recognizable across great distance through shared habits, brick proportions, weights, seals, urban planning, craft forms, and certain ways of managing water. But after around 1900 BCE, though dates vary by region, these habits begin to change. The great cities do not all vanish at once. Mohenjo-Daro continues in some form for a time, but its urban quality declines. Harappa changes. Many smaller settlements shift, shrink, or transform. In some regions, new local cultures become more visible. Pottery styles alter. The seal tradition fades. The old script becomes uncommon. Standardized weights lose their earlier role. The shared urban grammar gives way to a more regional, less uniform world. This is one of the most important clues in the disappearance of the Indus civilization. What collapses is not simply population. What weakens is integration. A vast system that once linked city, town, village, workshop, field, river, coast, and trade route begins to fragment into smaller patterns. People still live. Fields are still planted. Animals are still herded. Pots are still made. Children are still born beside old mounds. But the wide, disciplined sameness of the mature Indus age no longer binds everything together. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the pace and causes of this change, but the direction is difficult to miss. At Mohenjo-Daro, later occupation levels suggest crowding subdivision and changes in the maintenance of urban space. Grand civic planning gives way in places to more irregular use. Buildings are altered. Some drains become less carefully maintained. Earlier public order seems to weaken. This does not mean people suddenly forgot how to build or manage a city. It means the institutions, labour systems, resources, or social agreements that sustained the old order may have been under strain. Urban life is expensive. It requires food, surplus workers, authority, cooperation, and confidence. When those conditions weaken, people do not always abandon the city immediately. They improvise within it. Harappa tells its own version of this transition. The site remains important, but changes in burial practices, pottery settlement organization, and material culture suggest a society moving away from the mature Indus pattern. Cemetery H culture associated with later levels at Harappa has often been discussed in relation to this transformation. Earlier interpretations sometimes try to tie such changes too quickly to invasion or ethnic replacement, but modern approaches are more cautious. Cultural change does not automatically mean a new people violently replacing an old one. It can reflect migration, intermarriage, local development, changing beliefs, altered economy, or all of these together. What survives in the record suggests transition, not a simple break. A lesser known but revealing sign of strain is the changing role of craft specialization. The Indus cities supported skilled artisans who produced objects requiring training materials and exchange networks, etched carnelian beads, standardized seals, shell bangles, faience ornaments, metal tools, and finely made pottery. Such crafts depend on demand. They also depend on access to raw materials and on consumers or institutions able to support specialists. As urban centers shrink or lose influence, highly specialized crafts may decline, move, or become localized. The disappearance of a luxury bead style can seem minor beside the abandonment of a city, but it may signal a deeper economic shift. It means the social world that valued, distributed, and paid for that object has changed. There are also signs that settlement patterns move in new directions. In some areas, especially toward the east and southeast, the number of smaller rural settlements appears to increase after the urban decline, though the picture is regionally complex. This suggests not mass death, but dispersal and adaptation. People may have left vulnerable urban centers for places where farming, herding, and local water sources seemed more reliable. A family facing repeated flood damage, reduced trade, or uncertain grain supply does not need to understand a civilizational collapse in order to make a practical decision. It only needs to decide that life elsewhere has become easier. The change is not only economic or environmental, it is symbolic. The fading of seals and writing suggests that the old administrative or identity systems no longer operate with the same force. If a seal once marked a merchant house, an official, a ritual group, or a controlled exchange, then fewer seals mean fewer reasons to use that system. If standardized weights once linked markets across regions, their decline suggests trade is becoming more local or less regulated. If bricks no longer follow old ratios consistently, then shared building norms are losing authority. These are the quiet signs of a civilization's inner language changing. No single explanation fully accounts for all of this. Environmental stress may have placed pressure on agriculture and water supply. River shifts may have undermined settlements along old channels. Trade with Mesopotamia and the Gulf may have weakened. Internal social structures may have become less capable of organizing labor. Disease, though difficult to prove, may have affected dense urban populations. Changing beliefs or political arrangements may have reduced the importance of old city centers. These possibilities do not exclude one another. In fact, the most plausible picture is one in which several pressures interact over generations. The idea of strain is important because it avoids the false choice between catastrophe and continuity. The Indus Civilization did not simply prosper one year and vanish the next, but it also did not continue unchanged. Something fundamental happened. The urban system lost coherence. Its most distinctive features faded. Its cities became less central. Its symbols fell silent. The people endured, but the civilization as an integrated Bronze Age urban world did not. To imagine this moment, it is better not to picture panic everywhere. Picture uncertainty becoming ordinary. A merchant finds that fewer distant buyers come for certain goods. A craft worker notices that old seal orders decline. A household repairs a wall with whatever brick is available, not with the old standard care. A settlement elder hears that a river channel has shifted farther away. A farmer watches the rain arrive late or not long enough. A family moves eastward not as refugees in a single great flight, but as one more household making a decision that many others also make. Civilization can dissolve through choices that feel local, reasonable, and temporary. The first signs of strain, therefore, do not look like an ending to those living through them. They look like adjustment, a little less trade, a little more repair, a new pottery style, a smaller settlement, a changed burial, a seal no longer needed, a route no longer worth taking. But across a wide region repeated for decades and centuries, these small adjustments become a transformation too large to ignore. The Indus world is still inhabited, still inventive, still alive. Yet it is becoming something else, and the mystery deepens because no one leaves behind the words to say when they first noticed the old order slipping away. For a long time, the end of the Indus civilization was imagined with the violence that later history often expects from the fall of cities. It was tempting to see the ruins and fill the silence with invasion. A great civilization disappears. Its script falls mute. Its cities decline. Its people leave no readable explanation. Into that gap an army was once placed outsiders arriving from beyond the northwest, breaking into the cities, destroying the old world, and replacing it with another. The story had force because it was simple, and simple endings are attractive when evidence is fragmentary. But archaeology has a way of making simple stories uneasy. The older invasion idea rested partly on scattered human remains from Mohenjo-Daro, and on interpretations formed in a time when scholars often explained cultural change through conquest and migration too quickly. A number of skeletons found in parts of the city were once described as victims of massacre, as if they lay where invaders cut them down. The image was dramatic bodies in the streets, urban order shattered by sudden violence, a civilization ended by the sword. Yet later reassessment weakened that interpretation. The remains did not come from one clear destruction layer across the whole city. They were not all securely tied to the final moment of occupation. Their positions and context were more complicated than the massacre story allowed. Some may reflect ordinary death, disturbed burials, disease later deposition, or local episodes of violence, but they do not prove the extermination of Mohenjo-Daro. This matters because one city's supposed massacre once carried the burden of explaining an entire civilization's disappearance. When that evidence becomes uncertain, the grand narrative begins to collapse. Across the Indus region, archaeologists do not find a consistent horizon of burning and destruction marking the end of the mature urban phase. There are damaged areas, abandoned structures, flood deposits, rebuilding episodes, and signs of decline, but not a single layer of conquest repeated from site to site. The great cities do not show the same final catastrophe at the same time. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira Kalibangan, and other settlements follow different trajectories. Some shrink, some transform, some are abandoned, some continue with altered material culture. The pattern is too uneven for one sweeping military event. Weapons also fail to dominate the story. The Indus people had blades, spearheads, arrowheads, and other tools that could be used violently, and no large society should be imagined as free of conflict. But compared with many ancient civilizations, the archaeological record does not emphasize organized warfare. There are no abundant royal battle scenes, no long inscriptions of campaigns, no clear mass graves tied to conquest, no widespread destruction layers that define the end. Fortified or raised areas exist, but walls can serve many purposes. They can control floods, mark social boundaries, protect stores, manage access, display authority, or defend against threats. A wall is not automatically a battlefield. The shift away from invasion does not mean that no outsiders entered the region, and it does not mean that migration played no role in South Asian prehistory. Human populations are always moving, mixing, marrying, trading, herding, and adapting. Later Indo-Aryan languages and cultural transformations are part of a complex and much debated history involving archaeology, linguistics, genetics, and ancient texts from periods after the mature Indus decline. But it is no longer responsible to claim that the urban Indus civilization was simply destroyed in a single violent invasion. The timing evidence and regional complexity do not support that old dramatic picture. Scholars still debate many details of population movement, but the fall of the Indus cities is better understood as a long transformation than as a battlefield event. A lesser-known reason the invasion model faded is that it underestimated the Indus civilization itself. It treated the cities as passive victims waiting for a stronger group to arrive, rather than as complex systems already facing environmental, economic, and social pressures. When a civilization declines gradually, it can become vulnerable in ways that leave few heroic traces. People may abandon neighborhoods before enemies arrive. Institutions may weaken before walls are breached. Trade may contract before armies march. A city can lose its purpose without losing a battle. The absence of war at the end is not an absence of drama. It is a different kind of drama, quieter and perhaps more unsettling. There may still have been violence in the Indus world's final centuries. Local conflicts could have erupted over water pasture fields, trade goods, or authority. People under stress do not become peaceful, simply because archaeologists lack battle monuments. Some skeletons from Indus sites show injuries and fortified layouts. In some places may reflect concerns about security as well as environment. But local violence is not the same as civilizational destruction by war. The evidence remains incomplete and caution cuts both ways. It would be naive to imagine a perfectly peaceful Bronze Age society, but it would be equally misleading to force conquest onto ruins that do not clearly show it. The lack of a battlefield changes the whole moral shape of the mystery. War gives history villains and victims. It gives a clean before and after. It allows a city's fall to be imagined in smoke shouting and broken gates. The Indus decline denies that satisfaction. It asks for attention to slower forces, weakening monsoons, shifting rivers, changing trade routes, fading institutions, local adaptation, and the cumulative cost of maintaining cities in an unstable landscape. These forces do not arrive with banners. They arrive as late rains, silted channels, failed repairs, empty workshops, and decisions made at the household level. This is not less tragic. In some ways, it is more human. A conquered city knows the moment of impact. A slowly declining city may not. Its people may continue to live among old walls, using parts of buildings whose original purpose has faded. Children may grow up in neighborhoods already reduced from earlier grandeur, never knowing the city as their grandparents knew it. A drain that once symbolized civic order becomes a broken channel. A large public structure becomes a quarry for brick. A seal that once carried authority becomes unnecessary. No trumpet announces that the mature Indus world is ending. Life continues, and continuation disguises loss. The absence of war also forces a sharper question about resilience. If the Indus civilization was not destroyed by enemies, why could it not preserve its urban system? The answer may lie in the fact that cities are not only built from walls, they are built from reasons. People live in them because they offer security, work exchange, ritual identity, water, food access, protection, or authority. When enough of those reasons weaken, the city becomes less compelling. It may still stand, but standing is not the same as functioning. The Indus cities may have survived physically longer than their social logic survived. By the time the old invasion story fades, the Indus civilization becomes more mysterious, not less. A violent conquest would have been easier to understand. Instead, the evidence points toward a society that changed without leaving a single catastrophic scar. Its end may have been a prolonged adjustment to pressures that no leader council, merchant network, or ritual system could fully overcome. The people did not vanish beneath enemy swords. They dispersed, reorganized, and carried parts of their world into new forms. The cities, however, lost the shared structure that made them unmistakably Indus. In the ruins, this means the silence must be read carefully. A quiet site is not proof of peace, but neither is it permission to invent war. The bricks of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa do not tell of a final battle. They tell of maintenance, repair, flooding, occupation, alteration, and decline. They tell of a civilization whose disappearance was not theatrical enough for legend, but too vast to ignore. And once war is removed as the easy answer, the landscape itself begins to step forward as the next suspect, the rivers that once sustained the Indus world, and the strange possibility that some of them change their minds. Rivers are often drawn as if they are promises. A blue line enters the map, bends with quiet certainty, and continues toward the sea. But the rivers of the Indus world were never so obedient. They were living forces moving through loose alluvial plains, building land, cutting land, abandoning land, and sometimes leaving behind channels like old scars. A city or village might stand near water for generations, long enough for people to imagine the river as part of the natural order of things. Then the channel could weaken, shift, flood differently, or leave. When that happened, the map in people's minds had to change faster than the habits of settlement. This matters most in the story of the Gagga-Hakra system, one of the most debated landscapes in South Asian archaeology. Today the Gagga in India and the Hakra in Pakistan are largely seasonal or dry, across much of their old course, but along and near this region archaeologists have found many ancient settlements. Some belong to the Indus tradition. Their presence raised a powerful question: did a much larger river once flow there, during the rise of the civilization, supporting towns and farms before weakening or drying? The answer is complicated. Geological studies suggest that major Himalayan rivers may once have flowed through parts of this region in deeper time, but by the mature Indus period the system was likely not a great glacier-fed river like the Indus itself. It may have depended more heavily on monsoon rainfall and seasonal flows. Scholars still debate the timing, strength, and human impact of these changes, and the evidence remains incomplete. The older dream of a mighty lost river vanishing suddenly beneath the Indus cities is too simple. Yet the newer picture is not less important. A river does not need to be enormous to matter. A seasonal or monsoon-fed river can support settlements. If rains are reliable, enough channels hold enough water. Groundwater is accessible and fields can be cultivated at the right times. If the monsoon weakens or becomes more erratic, such a system can become fragile. Communities that once thrived along it may find themselves facing shorter flow seasons, deeper wells, less predictable crops, and shrinking reasons to remain in larger settlements. The river may not disappear in a single dramatic moment. It may simply become less dependable, and that can be enough. The Indus people had long experience with moving water. They did not build in ignorance. Many settlements were placed with careful attention to water access, trade soil, and safety. Some stood near active river channels. Others occupied interfluves, old levees, or zones where floodwater and rainfall could be used. Their choices show knowledge of local conditions, but knowledge is not the same as control. A river can shift beyond the reach of planning. Avulsion, the process by which a river abandons one channel and carves or occupies another, can transform a landscape. Floods can raise beds with silt. Tectonic movements can subtly alter gradients. Climate can change the volume and rhythm of flow. Human communities adapt, but adaptation has costs. Kalibangan offers a haunting example of settlement near a changing water world. Located near the Zaga system, it preserves evidence of Indus urban planning and also earlier occupation. Its streets and fire altars or ritual installations, debated in meaning, show a structured community linked to the wider civilization. Yet the region's later history is tied to declining water availability. The site was abandoned during or after the mature Indus period, though the exact reasons remain debated. It would be too easy to say simply the river dried and the people left, as if one line explains all. But water stress, shifting channels, and broader urban decline likely formed part of the pressure. What survives suggests that the people of this region were living close to environmental thresholds that could move over generations. In the lower Indus, the problem could be the opposite. Mohenjo-Daro appears to have suffered repeated flooding. Floods bring fertility to fields, but in a dense city they can also bring destruction. Water undermines walls, fills drains, leaves silt, damages stored goods, and forces rebuilding. The city's rising levels show adaptation, but also burden. To rebuild after one flood is resilience. To rebuild again and again requires labor resources, authority, and belief that the effort is still worthwhile. If other pressures are already weakening the urban system, repeated flooding can become one more reason for people to leave or reduce investment. This is one of the strangest truths of the Indus decline. Water may have failed in different ways in different places. Some regions may have faced drying, others may have faced destructive floods or river instability. Coastal and deltic zones had their own challenges, including changing shorelines, sedimentation, and access to maritime routes. A civilization spread across such a wide environmental range does not collapse from one uniform event. It responds unevenly to a landscape that is itself uneven. One settlement loses a channel, another has too much floodwater, another finds its trade route less convenient. Another survives by shifting crops or moving a short distance. The result is not a single collapse line, but a geography of stress. The Gagahakra debate also shows how archaeology can become entangled with memory, identity, and later tradition. Some have connected ancient riverbeds with the Saraswati River known from later texts, and the subject can become culturally and politically charged. A careful account must separate evidence from desire. There were ancient channels in the region. There were Indus settlements near them. Water availability changed. But linking every archaeological fact directly to later textual memory is difficult and often disputed. The landscape may preserve traces of rivers that mattered deeply to ancient people, but the names, meanings, and stories attached to them cannot be recovered with certainty from sediment alone. For the people living there, the experience would not have been a scholarly debate. It would have been practical. A well that once reached water easily now needs deeper digging. A field that once held moisture after seasonal flow now dries too soon. A village pond fails before the hot months end. A caravan route shifts because one stopping place can no longer support animals. Families begin to favour settlements closer to more reliable water or rainfall. Potters, herders, farmers and traders all feel the change differently, but all are tied to it. The river's retreat does not have to be total. It only has to disturb the balance between effort and return. As water systems changed, the old urban network faced a problem that no city could solve alone. A great city depends on its hinterland. It needs grain, animals, fuel, raw materials, labour and routes. If villages along river systems struggle or disperse, the city feels the loss. If rural producers move away from the channels that once fed urban exchange, the old centres may become less well supplied. If merchants must adjust routes, standard systems of trade may weaken. Rivers are not merely water, they are corridors of civilization. When they change course, they change the shape of society. The Indus Civilization had risen by mastering local water conditions without freezing them in place. Its wells, reservoirs, drains, and platforms show intelligence everywhere. But the slow rearrangement of rivers may have pushed that intelligence toward different choices. In some places, the best response was not to preserve the city but to leave it. In others, it was to abandon old urban habits and live in smaller, more flexible settlements. This is not failure in a simple sense, it is adaptation. Yet from the perspective of the mature Indus system, adaptation could look like disappearance. By the time the old river landscapes begin to fail or shift, the civilization's silence becomes even more frustrating. No inscription tells of a council deciding to move. No record lists years of poor flow. No lament names a river that no longer comes. The evidence is in settlement maps, sediments, abandoned channels, wells, flood layers, and altered material culture. It is a story written in land rather than words. And the land says that the Indus world was never destroyed by a single river drying overnight. It was shaped, stressed, and redirected by water systems that changed at the pace of landscapes and lifetimes. The rivers did not betray the Indus people. They did what rivers do. They move through time. The tragedy, if it can be called that, is that human systems often depend on rivers behaving long enough like fixed things. The Indus Civilization built one of the great urban worlds of antiquity by learning water's habits. But when those habits shifted, the civilization's own habits had to shift as well. Cities that once seemed permanent became less necessary. Channels that once carried life became memories in sand. And somewhere in the dry beds and buried courses of northwest India and Pakistan, the question of disappearance becomes less like a murder mystery and more like the story of a world slowly losing the geography that had taught it how to live. If rivers are the bones of the Indus world, the monsoon is its breath. It arrives not as a single storm but as a seasonal turning of the sky, a shift in winds and pressure that pulls moisture across the ocean and sends rain over land. In good years, the rains feed fields, refill ponds, strengthen seasonal streams, recharge groundwater, and make the next harvest feel possible. In weak years, the same landscape tightens. Soil dries sooner, wells sink lower, pasture thins. Farmers wait longer under a sky that gives less than memory promised. A civilization does not need the monsoon to vanish completely in order to suffer. It only needs the rhythm to become unreliable. Across the wider Indus region, evidence from lake sediments, marine cores, cave deposits, river records and archaeological settlement patterns suggest that climate conditions changed during and after the mature urban period. Many researchers connect part of the Indus transformation to a weakening or shifting monsoon around the 2nd millennium BCE, though the timing, regional effects and exact relationship to urban decline remain debated. Climate does not act like a hand that simply knocks cities down. It presses through food, water, disease, migration, trade and social confidence. It changes choices before it changes ruins. For the farmers who support the cities, small changes matter. Wheat and barley may depend on winter moisture, river flooding, or stored soil water depending on location. Summer crops depend differently on rainfall. Pastoralists need grazing lands. Villages need water for people and animals. A few poor seasons can be survived with stored grain exchange herd movement or help from neighbouring regions. But if uncertainty stretches across generations, old systems begin to lose their reliability. People plant differently. They move herds farther. They choose smaller settlements. They diversify crops. They rely more on local resilience than on urban exchange. What looks from a distance like civilizational decline may have felt locally like practical adjustment. One of the more subtle insights from recent thinking is that the weakening monsoon may not have produced only disaster. In some regions, less intense flooding could initially have opened or stabilized land for agriculture. Changes in river behavior may have created opportunities before they created crises. Environmental change is rarely simple. A shift that harms one settlement may help another for a time. A weakening flood regime may make certain fields easier to cultivate while also reducing the long-term water supply. This complexity is one reason scholars still debate exactly how climate shaped the Indus decline. The evidence points toward stress, but not toward a single uniform catastrophe. Still, the broad direction is difficult to ignore. As rainfall becomes less dependable in parts of the region, the old urban system becomes harder to maintain. Cities need surplus, and surplus needs confidence. Grain must arrive from hinterlands in quantities large enough to feed non-farming specialists, bead makers, seal cutters, traders, builders, administrators, ritual workers and others whose labour does not directly produce food every day. If rural production becomes more uncertain, cities must either organise redistribution more effectively or shrink. If trade routes also weaken and rivers shift and public maintenance becomes more costly, the pressure compounds. Climate rarely works alone, but it strengthens every other problem. The monsoon's uncertainty also changes time itself. In a stable rhythm, people know when to prepare fields, when to expect river rise, when to move animals, when to build, when to travel. In an unstable rhythm, planning becomes guesswork. A merchant delays departure because a water source along the route may fail. A farmer hesitates between crops. A household stores more grain and trades less. A community invests in wells instead of public buildings. Local caution replaces regional ambition. This kind of change leaves faint archaeological traces, but over time it can reshape an entire civilization. Dholavira's reservoirs show how seriously some Indus communities took water storage, especially in dry zones. Their engineering is impressive precisely because scarcity was expected. But even the best reservoir depends on rain or runoff arriving often enough to fill it. A structure can store water, it cannot command the sky. When dry periods lengthen, storage becomes a way of enduring, not escaping stress. The same is true of wells. Digging deeper can help, but groundwater is not infinite. Maintenance grows harder as water retreats. A city's technical skill buys resilience, yet resilience has limits. There may also have been social consequences that archaeology can only glimpse. In times of water stress, authority is tested. Who controls access to wells, reservoirs, fields, or stored grain? Who decides which neighbourhoods receive repair? Who organises labour for canals, embankments, platforms, or drainage? Who mediates between farmers and urban consumers when harvests fail? The Indus Civilization's political structure is already obscure, and this obscurity becomes sharper in crisis. Without readable texts, we cannot know whether disputes over water or food strained communities from within. But it would be surprising if environmental pressure had no social effects. A lesser-known detail is that the Indus decline overlaps with broader patterns of stress across parts of the Bronze Age world, though each region has its own history. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, Central Asia and other areas, shifts in climate, trade and political order affected societies at different times. This does not mean a single global disaster explains everything. It does suggest that Bronze Age civilizations were deeply sensitive to water regimes and exchange networks. The Indus case stands apart because its urban decline happens without the same readable archives and without clear war destruction. Its climate story must be reconstructed from mudshells, sediments, seeds and settlement maps. The monsoon leaves no inscription. It writes in oxygen isotopes, lake levels, pollen, abandoned fields and the changing distribution of villages. It writes in the distance between old riverbeds and later settlements. It writes in the disappearance of urban habits that required dependable surplus. When archaeologists and climate scientists piece these traces together, they do not find a simple sentence. They find a pattern of increasing variability and regional stress, one that fits the slow transformation already visible in the cities. For the people themselves, the weakening rains may have been understood through memory and ritual rather than data. Elders remember when a seasonal stream ran longer. Farmers remember when wells were shallower. Mothers remember the year stored grain had to be stretched thin. Herders remember pastures that once lasted deeper into the dry months. No one needs to say that a civilization is ending. They say the rain is late. They say the river is low. They say the old field is not worth the labour. They say a cousin has moved east. They say the city demands too much and gives too little. This is how climate enters human history, not as weather alone, but as a pressure on trust. Trust that the next harvest will come. Trust that the city will feed its workers. Trust that routes remain viable. Trust that wells will answer when the bucket drops. Trust that the old standards still matter. When that trust weakens, people do not always rebel or panic. Often they adapt. They become more local, more mobile, more cautious, more rural. They loosen their dependence on the very systems that once made the civilization grand. The Indus civilization does not disappear because the sky closes forever. It changes because the balance between water, land, labour and urban life shifts over time. The monsoon grows uncertain, and uncertainty spreads through the system, like hairline cracks through fired clay. At first the vessel still holds, then it holds less, then people find other vessels. By the end of the mature urban phase, the old cities are no longer the obvious answer to life in the region. Smaller settlements, diverse crops, local water strategies and new regional cultures make more sense in many places. This is not the end of human life in the Indus lands. It is the end of a particular confidence, the confidence that large standardized water-managed cities can keep organizing the world as before. The rains have not shouted, they have whispered over centuries, and the people listening closely have begun to move. A collapse without a single moment is difficult to picture because the mind wants a scene. It wants the last gate closed, the last fire burning, the last ruler fleeing, the last inscription carved in panic. The Indus civilization gives almost none of that. Its decline is not a clean theatrical ending but a long alteration of scale. Cities that once gathered people, goods, symbols and labour into dense urban forms become less central. Villages and smaller towns matter more. Regional habits grow stronger. The old shared standards fade. The civilization does not fall like a wall struck by a ram. It settles, disperses, and changes shape like a river losing force across a plain. This is why the word collapse must be used carefully. Something did collapse: the mature urban system, the great city network, the widespread use of seals and script, the remarkable standardization of weights and bricks, the long-distance integration that made Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dolavira, and other places feel part of one broad world. But human life did not collapse in the same way. People kept farming, herding, cooking, burying their dead, making pottery, moving through landscapes, adapting to new water conditions and forming new communities. The end of the Indus civilization is therefore both real and deceptive. It is real because the old urban order disappears. It is deceptive because the people remain. By the late urban and post-urban phases, the archaeology becomes more regional. In some areas, settlements are smaller and more dispersed. In others, continuity remains stronger for a time. Some sites show reduced craft specialization. Others show new styles and local traditions. The great city becomes less of a magnet. This shift may reflect practical choices rather than sudden desperation. Smaller settlements require less centralized maintenance. They can be closer to particular fields, wells, pastures, or seasonal streams. They may survive better when long-distance trade is less reliable and water regimes are changing. A village does not need the same administrative machinery as a city. It can bend where a city must hold firm. Mohenjo-Daro's decline captures this transformation in brick and dust. The city does not seem to end in one great fire. Instead, later phases suggest a diminished urban life, with parts of the city reused, altered, and occupied less formally than before. Grand planning loses force. Some buildings are subdivided. Public systems no longer carry the same coherence. People may still live among the remains of earlier greatness, but the older civic confidence is weakened. There is a melancholy familiarity in this. Many later cities in history have lived inside their own ruins, with ordinary families cooking beside walls, built for institutions whose names they no longer know. Dolavira offers another kind of ending. Its careful water systems and planned spaces show a city deeply adapted to scarcity, but over time it too declines and is eventually abandoned. The reasons likely include environmental stress, shifting trade or settlement patterns, and the broader weakening of the urban network. Yet the abandonment of such a place should not be imagined simply as failure. If the reservoirs no longer justify the labour, if trade connections no longer bring enough value, if nearby resources no longer support dense occupation, leaving may be the most intelligent response. Civilizations sometimes disappear because people make rational decisions under changed conditions. One surprising detail is that the post-urban Indus world may have become in some places more numerous in settlements, even as cities declined. This depends on region and interpretation, but it suggests dispersal rather than mass extinction. A landscape of fewer great cities and more small communities is not empty. It is reorganized. From the viewpoint of a city planner, it may look like decline. From the viewpoint of a farming household seeking reliable land and water, it may look like survival. The Indus story forces both perspectives to be held at once. The fading of the script remains one of the clearest markers of the old order's end. Scripts do not vanish merely because people stop being intelligent or stop speaking. They vanish when the institutions that need them vanish, or when their social value declines. If Indus signs were tied to seals, administration, ownership, ritual identity, or regulated exchange, then their decline suggests that these systems no longer functioned as before. The loss of writing is not just a cultural curiosity. It is a symptom of a transformed society. The world that required those signs has passed out of use. The same is true of standardized weights. Their earlier precision makes sense in a broad exchange system. If that system fragments, local measures can return. Goods may still move, but perhaps not through the same regulated networks. Trade does not have to end completely. It only has to become less central, less standardized, less capable of binding distant regions into a single civilization. The disappearance of a weight system can be as historically meaningful as the destruction of a palace, though much quieter. No single explanation fully accounts for the long transformation, because the transformation itself is not single. Environmental stress, river changes, weakening monsoons, trade shifts, altered settlement choices possible, disease changing social authority, and regional cultural developments all likely interact. The great danger is to choose one cause and make it act alone. A city already weakened by declining trade may be more vulnerable to flood. A farming region stressed by weak rains may become less able to supply urban specialists. A political or ritual system dependent on old symbols may lose legitimacy when practical conditions change. Collapse is often not one blow, but the point at which several supports fail to reinforce one another. Inside this process, daily life continues with unsettling normality. A potter experiments with a style that would have seemed local or unusual in the mature period. A farmer plants a crop better suited to changing rainfall. A family dismantles bricks from an older structure and uses them in a smaller house. A trader who once travelled far now works a shorter route. A seal cutter has fewer commissions. A child grows up near a mound where older streets lie buried, hearing, perhaps, that the ancestors built higher, larger, better, or simply differently. The past becomes material, not memory, old bricks underfoot, old wells, still useful old walls repurposed. This gradualness makes the Indus disappearance feel modern in an uncomfortable way. It shows that complex systems can lose coherence without a dramatic announcement. Infrastructure may remain visible after the social system that built it has weakened. Standards may continue by habit before fading. People may adapt successfully as individuals while the larger order dissolves. The result can be both survival and loss. No one needs to intend the end of a civilization for a civilization to end. By the time the mature Indus system has fully given way, the landscape is not silent. It is filled with smaller worlds. New regional cultures continue the human story. The old cities become mound sources of brick memory and eventually archaeology. The great urban experiment has ended, but not because a sword cut it down. It ended because the reasons for maintaining it no longer outweighed the pressures against it. Water shifted, rain weakened, networks thinned, authority changed, households moved. And what had once been one of the most extensive urban civilizations on Earth became something harder to name, dispersed through the lives of people who carried on without preserving the old city's voice. People move more quietly than civilizations collapse. A city can become a ruin in the archaeological imagination, but the families who leave it do not vanish into the horizon like smoke. They carry baskets, tools, seeds, memories, animals, habits of cooking, ways of shaping clay, ways of measuring value, gestures learned from parents, and stories that may survive for a while, even when no one writes them down. The Indus Civilization's cities decline, but its people continue into landscapes that are changing around them. The old urban order weakens, yet life spreads outward in smaller, more flexible forms. This is one of the most important corrections to the idea of disappearance. The Indus people did not simply die out. What disappears is the mature urban system, the great planned cities, the widespread seals, the standardized weights, the shared architectural habits, and the script as a functioning public sign system. But the human population continues mixed through migration, local adaptation, and cultural transformation. Archaeology does not show an empty land after the Indus. It shows new patterns. Settlements shift. Regional cultures become clearer. Farming strategies change. Pottery styles evolve. Old practices continue in altered ways while others fade beyond recognition. In some regions, people move towards smaller rural settlements, especially where local water and farming conditions offer better chances than declining cities. This movement is not always a long dramatic migration. It can be stepwise and practical. A household leaves one neighborhood for a nearby village. A village splits as younger families settle closer to fields. Herders adjust seasonal routes. Farmers try crops better suited to new rainfall patterns. Craftspeople follow demand. Over generations, these local movements can redraw the human map more completely than any royal decree. The Eastern shift, often discussed in Indus studies, reflects this wider transformation. As conditions change in parts of the northwest settlement, becomes more prominent in some areas farther east, including regions associated with the upper Ganges-Yamuna Doab and neighbouring zones, though the details vary and must be treated carefully. This does not mean the whole population marches east as one people in one moment. It means that the centre of gravity changes. The mature Indus pattern gives way to more regional, more rural, and in some cases more rain-adapted ways of life. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the scale, timing and meaning of these shifts, but the broad movement away from large urban centres is clear. Pottery becomes one of the quiet witnesses. Archaeologists trace changing ceramic traditions through shape, fabric decoration, firing and context. A pot is not just a container, it is a habit made visible. When pottery changes, it may signal new tastes, new communities, new functions, new identities, or simply local adaptation. In the post-urban Indus world, pottery traditions become less standardized and more regional. This is not a decline in intelligence or skill. It is the fading of a shared cultural system that once made distant places resemble one another. Local life is speaking louder now than the old urban grammar. Farming also changes. In different regions, people adjust crop choices according to water, soil and season. Millets, which are hardy and useful in drier conditions, become more important in some areas. Rice appears in certain regions, especially toward the east, though its role expands over time and varies by context. Wheat and barley continue where suitable. Pulses and oilseeds remain part of agricultural life. These shifts suggest resilience. People are not merely victims of climate, they are experimenters. They alter subsistence strategies to match the world they inhabit. No single explanation fully accounts for every regional pattern, but changing agriculture is one of the clearest signs that people are adapting after the urban peak. Some practices may continue in ways that are difficult to prove because continuity can be subtle. Bangles, beads, ornaments, cattle symbolism, water practices, craft techniques, and certain settlement habits may persist in altered forms. Yet caution is essential. It is tempting to draw direct lines from the Indus Civilization to later South Asian traditions, and some lines may indeed exist, but archaeology rarely allows simple certainty across such deep time. A motif can survive while its meaning changes. A ritual-looking object can resemble a later practice without proving direct continuity. A symbol may be inherited, reinvented, or coincidentally similar. What survives in the record suggests both continuity and transformation woven together too tightly to separate with confidence. The dead also change their archaeological language. Burial practices in the later phases differ in some regions from earlier mature Indus patterns. At Harappa Cemetery, H material has long attracted attention because it seems to mark cultural change after the urban phase. Older interpretations sometimes made it evidence for intrusive populations, but modern views are more careful. Changes in burial customs can reflect many things: altered beliefs, local developments, interaction with new groups, social stress, or evolving identity among descendants of earlier communities. The graves do not give a simple ethnic label. They show that memory, death, and belonging were being renegotiated. This renegotiation may have been happening everywhere. People who leave a great city do not stop being shaped by it. They may remember its wells, its crowded lanes, its markets, its festivals, its dangers, its floods. They may carry fragments of urban knowledge into villages that no longer need the whole system. A builder knows how baked brick behaves even if mud brick is now enough. A trader knows old weights even if a local exchange no longer requires strict standards. A family remembers a seal mark even if seals are no longer used. Cultural memory can outlive the institutions that created it, but as generations pass, memory becomes habit, and habit becomes something new. There is a quiet sadness in this. The Indus civilization may have survived most successfully by ceasing to be what it was. Large cities required concentration, coordination, and maintenance. Smaller settlements offered flexibility. The people who adapted may have saved themselves precisely by abandoning the structures later ages admire most. From their point of view, survival mattered more than preserving an archaeological category. They did not live in order to remain legible to the future. The old cities became part of the landscape. Their bricks were reused. Their mounds rose above fields. Their wells may have remained visible or useful for a time. Children may have played on walls whose original builders were already becoming ancestral. Stories may have attached themselves to the mounds, changing over centuries until the real names were lost. This is how a civilization can become folklore without leaving history. The material remains persist, but the explanation dissolves. When later cultures rise in South Asia, they do so in a world where the Indus past is present beneath the soil, but absent from written memory. This absence is not emptiness. It is an inheritance without a clear label. The people who once lived in Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro contributed biologically and culturally to later populations in complex ways, alongside other streams of ancestry and influence. The exact pathways are debated, and no responsible account should turn uncertainty into certainty. But the Indus people did not vanish as human beings. They became part of the long mix changing fabric of the subcontinent, so the disappearance begins to look different. It is not a door closing on a deserted room. It is a crowd leaving a great hall through many exits, carrying pieces of the hall into the open air. Some pieces are practical, some symbolic, some forgotten, almost at once. Behind them the old city stands, losing its function, then its name, then its story. Ahead of them lie villages, fields, new river banks, new climates of habit, new forms of belonging. The memory remains, but it no longer remains whole. By the time the great Indus cities have faded, the question is no longer whether something happened, but how many things happened at once. A civilization spread across such a wide and varied world does not become smaller for one reason alone. It is tempting to search for the single key: a dried river, a failed monsoon, a broken trade route, an epidemic, a social revolt, an invasion, a change of faith, a lost crop, a ruined port. Each explanation has its own appeal because each makes the story easier to hold. But the Indus disappearance resists that kind of neatness. The evidence points not to one culprit standing over the body, but to a room full of pressures, each leaving a different kind of trace. Climate is one of the stronger suspects, but climate is not a simple villain. The weakening or increased variability of monsoon patterns likely placed real stress on parts of the Indus world. Rainfall shapes crops, pastures, groundwater, seasonal rivers, and settlement choices. When rains become less dependable, farmers adapt first, then villages, then cities. Yet climate alone cannot explain every regional difference. Some settlements continue, some areas become more important, some communities shift crops and survive. The same environmental change can produce hardship in one place and opportunity in another. No single explanation fully accounts for this, and the climate evidence must be read together with archaeology rather than forced to speak alone. River change is another powerful explanation, especially along the Gaga-Hakra and other shifting systems. If watercourses weaken, migrate, or become more seasonal, settlements tied to them may lose their foundations. If floods become too severe elsewhere, urban maintenance becomes more expensive. But again, river change is not one event. It is a long process with local effects. A channel can decline gradually. A floodplain can remain useful, even after a major river has moved. Groundwater can preserve life after surface flow weakens. People can relocate fields before abandoning settlements. Rivers help explain the pattern, but they do not write the whole script. Trade decline adds another strand. The Indus world was connected to the Gulf and Mesopotamia, and its internal exchange networks linked cities to raw materials, crafts, and rural hinterlands. If long-distance demand weakened, if Mesopotamian political conditions changed, if maritime routes shifted, or if urban consumers became fewer specialized crafts would suffer. Seals weights, luxury beads, shell objects, and standardized systems all belong to a world where exchange matters. Their decline suggests that the economic web had loosened, but trade decline may itself be a symptom as much as a cause. Cities under environmental stress trade less. Shrinking populations produce less surplus. Weakened institutions regulate fewer goods. The strand loops back into the others. Disease is harder to prove, but it cannot be ignored entirely. Dense urban settlements with water systems, animals' waste, and close human contact can create conditions for illness even when sanitation is unusually sophisticated for the ancient world. Some skeletal evidence from Indus sites has been studied for signs of health, stress, trauma, infection, or changing living conditions. Yet disease rarely leaves a clear civilizational label in the archaeological record unless preservation is exceptional. There is no proof of a single epidemic ending the Indus cities. Still declining urban maintenance, flooding, crowding, or poorer nutrition could have worsened health over time. The evidence remains incomplete, and this explanation must stay cautious. Social and political fragility may be the most important invisible factor. The Indus civilization clearly had mechanisms of coordination, but those mechanisms are difficult to identify. If authority was distributed through merchants, councils, ritual specialists, kin groups, or local elites, then resilience may have depended on cooperation rather than command from a single throne. Such a system could be flexible in good times and vulnerable in prolonged stress. When water management becomes harder, trade less profitable, and cities more costly to maintain, who has the authority to compel, repair, redistribute food, or organize migration? If no central power can hold the system together, fragmentation may be gradual and peaceful on the surface but decisive in outcome. A lesser-known possibility is that the very success of Indus standardization made later change more consequential. This civilization's shared weights, brick ratios, seals, and urban habits created trust across distance. But standards require institutions and repeated agreement. Once communities begin adapting locally, the value of maintaining distant standards may decline. A village facing water stress has little reason to preserve the exact brick ratio of a faraway city if local building needs are different. A trader working shorter routes may not require the old weight system. A household may care more about a reliable well than a seal tradition. The system unwinds because its pieces become less useful outside the world that created them. Popular explanations sometimes move beyond the evidence. Lost advanced technology, sudden mythical destruction, or direct identification with later legends can make the Indus story sound more dramatic, but they often flatten its real complexity. The true mystery is not that archaeologists have no evidence. It is that the evidence is abundant but indirect. Bricks, sediments, bones, seeds, seals, drains, and settlement maps all speak, but none speaks alone. The Indus civilization does not need fantasy to be mysterious. Its actual disappearance is strange enough, a huge urban world dissolving without a clear war, without readable testimony, and without a single universal catastrophe. The most convincing picture is cumulative. A weakening monsoon places pressure on agriculture and water supply. Rivers shift or become less reliable in some zones while floods burden others. Trade networks thin. Urban institutions struggle to maintain public works. Craft specialization loses support. People move towards smaller, more adaptable settlements. Regional traditions replace wide uniformity. The script and seal system fade because the world that needed them has changed. Each factor strengthens the next. Remove one and the civilization might adapt. Combine several over generations and the old urban order becomes too costly to preserve. This kind of explanation can feel unsatisfying because it lacks a single dramatic answer. But history often works this way. Civilizations are not machines with one switch. They are living arrangements among land, labor, belief, food, authority, memory, and chance. When several arrangements fail to reinforce one another, transformation can become irreversible. The Indus case is especially powerful because it shows collapse without spectacle. There is no final conqueror to blame, no last king to mourn, no text that says the end has come. There is only the slow withdrawal of coherence. Standing among the ruins, the competing explanations do not cancel one another, they gather. The blocked drain belongs to maintenance and social order. The dry channel belongs to hydrology and climate. The missing seal belongs to trade and administration. The changing pottery belongs to local identity. The smaller village belongs to migration and survival. The weakened monsoon belongs to the sky. The abandoned city belongs to all of them together. So the answer to what happened is not one sentence but a woven account. The Indus civilization disappeared as an urban system because the conditions that supported its cities changed faster or more persistently than the system could adapt while remaining itself. Its people adapted, but their adaptation carried them beyond the civilization's old form. That is the paradox at the heart of the mystery. Survival and disappearance were not opposites. They may have been the same process seen from different distances. The Indus civilization leaves no clear farewell, but it does leave an afterlife. Not an afterlife of named kings or preserved chronicles, not the kind that later historians can arrange into dynasties, but a quieter survival beneath later South Asian history. Its cities fall out of memory, its script stops speaking, its seals vanish from use, and yet the people who lived within that world do not step outside time. They remain in the ancestry landscapes, habits, crops, animals, and cultural possibilities of the subcontinent. The difficulty is knowing exactly what continued, what changed, and what only appears similar because human societies often solve similar problems in similar ways. The temptation to draw direct lines is strong. Indus seals show animals' possible ritual scenes, seated figures, trees, composite beings, and symbols that seem full of meaning. Later South Asian religions also honor animals, water trees, fertility, ascetic postures, and sacred spaces. It is easy to look backward and see beginnings everywhere. Some scholars have explored possible continuities, especially in themes of ritual bathing reverence, for certain animals goddess-like figurines, pipal trees and yogic-looking postures. But caution is essential. A seated figure on a seal is not automatically a later god. A female figurine is not automatically a mother goddess. A bathing tank is not automatically the ancestor of every later purification ritual. The evidence remains incomplete and resemblance is not proof. Still, it would be equally wrong to imagine a total break. Civilizations rarely disappear so cleanly. The people of the Indus world continued living, mixing, moving, and adapting. Their descendants contributed to later populations. Their agricultural knowledge did not vanish. Their craft traditions may have survived in altered forms. Their familiarity with water management, settlement planning, cattle crops, ornaments, and regional exchange helped shape the long human background from which later societies emerged. The problem is that continuity after urban collapse becomes diffuse. It does not preserve a label saying Indus. It becomes part of ordinary life. Water may be one of the deepest threads. The Indus cities invested extraordinary attention in wells, bathing platforms, drains, reservoirs, and controlled flow. Later, South Asian cultures also give water immense ritual, social, and practical importance, though the pathways between these facts cannot be reduced to a single inheritance. In a monsoon landscape, water will always matter. Yet the scale and care of Indus water systems suggest habits of thought that may have echoed in practical traditions even after the cities declined. A well is not only technology, it is a social place, a routine, a boundary between purity and danger, abundance and anxiety. Cattle provide another possible thread, though again not a simple one. Zebu cattle were central to Indus life economy and imagery. The powerful humped bull appears repeatedly on seals and objects. Later, South Asian societies also give cattle major economic and symbolic roles. This does not prove one unbroken religious meaning across millennia, but it does show that certain relationships between humans, animals, agriculture, and status had deep roots in the region. The animal that pulled fed, fertilized signified wealth, and appeared in imagery did not lose its importance when cities faded. Craft survives in subtler ways. Bead-making, shell-working, metal use pottery traditions, and textile production all continue across South Asia in shifting forms. Some techniques may descend through long chains of practice, while others are reinvented or transformed. The Indus artisans were masters of precision, especially in carnelian bead production and standardized objects. Later craft worlds cannot be treated as direct copies, but the subcontinent's long reputation for skilled ornament, textiles, and material refinement did not arise from nothing. The Indus stands as one early and brilliant expression of that deeper craft landscape. The undeciphered script complicates the afterlife most of all. If the signs could be read, they might reveal names of deities, offices, places, or social groups that could be compared carefully with later traditions. Without that, connections remain suggestive rather than secure. The script's disappearance means that later South Asian writing systems cannot simply be shown as its descendants. Writing reappears in historically readable form much later under very different conditions. This gap matters. The Indus Civilization had a sign system, but its urban collapse broke the chain of legible memory. Later texts from South Asia, including the Vedas, belong to a world after the mature Indus cities and reflect different linguistic, ritual, and social formations. They may preserve memories of landscapes, rivers, conflicts, migrations, and older cultural encounters, but they cannot be used as straightforward chronicles of Harappa or Mohenjo-Daro. Scholars still debate how later Indo-Aryan traditions interacted with remnants of post-urban Indus populations and other groups. The safest account is one of mixture and transformation, rather than replacement or pure continuity. The subcontinent after the Indus was not empty, and it was not unchanged. It was a meeting ground of older inhabitants, moving populations, shifting languages, and evolving practices. This is where the Indus afterlife becomes most profound. Its legacy may not lie in a single institution surviving intact. It may lie in the way its people became part of later complexity. The cities disappeared, but the human streams continued. Some descendants remained near old regions, others moved. Some practices endured because they were useful, others were absorbed into new belief systems. Some memories may have turned into myths stripped of their original setting. Some were lost entirely. Time does not preserve civilizations as museums, it composts them into future worlds. The ruins themselves eventually became silent mounds. For centuries people lived near them without knowing their full antiquity. Bricks from ancient sites were reused. Harappa suffered especially when its ancient bricks were taken in large quantities for railway construction in the 19th century, long before the civilization's importance was fully understood. That detail is painful. One of the world's great Bronze Age cities, partly broken apart to build modern tracks, its deep past fed into a new age of movement. The civilization disappeared once in antiquity, then almost disappeared again through neglect before archaeology restored its name. When archaeologists finally recognized the age and scale of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro in the 20th century, the map of ancient civilization changed. The Indus was no longer a footnote beside Egypt and Mesopotamia. It became a third great urban world of the Bronze Age, vast, organized and distinct. Yet even that rediscovery is incomplete. Many sites remain underexplored. Some are threatened by erosion, agriculture development, salinity looting and climate. The afterlife of the Indus is still being written through excavation, conservation and debate. What did it leave behind? Not a single answer, but many traces: settlement knowledge, agricultural adaptation, craft skill, symbolic habits, genetic ancestry, altered landscapes, and the warning that urban brilliance can fade without a dramatic final war. Its greatest legacy may be the lesson that civilization is not only monuments and rulers, it is also drains, wells, weights, bricks, seeds, roots, and the daily agreements that allow strangers to share a world. When those agreements dissolve, the monuments may still stand, but the civilization has already moved on. The Indus afterlife is therefore a presence disguised as absence. It is under fields, beneath towns, in museum cases, in undeciphered signs, in old riverbeds, in the long history of South Asia's people and landscapes. It does not speak with the clarity of a royal inscription. It speaks through survival without a name, and perhaps that is why it remains so haunting. The Indus civilization did not leave a final message, but it became part of everything that came after, not as a preserved statue, but as a buried foundation, whose outline can still be felt when the light falls correctly across the ground. The Indus civilization did not disappear in the way a city disappears beneath fire, nor in the way a kingdom disappears when its last ruler is defeated. It disappeared by becoming harder to recognize. Its cities lost their central power, its script lost its function, its seals no longer moved through the same networks of trust. Its weights ceased to bind distant markets with the old precision. Its brick standards faded into local habit. The people remained, but the pattern that had made them part of one great urban world dissolved. That is, the final turn in the mystery disappearance was not absence. It was transformation so deep that later ages could no longer hear the civilization's original voice. This is why the ruins feel so strange. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are not empty because no one survived them. They are empty because the system that gave them meaning no longer needed them. A drain without maintenance becomes a trench. A seal without institutions becomes a carved stone. A city without dependable hinterlands, trade, water, labour and authority becomes a mound. The Indus world had been held together by repeated agreements, some practical and some symbolic. When those agreements weakened, the great cities did not have to be conquered. They only had to become less necessary. The strongest explanation is not a single event, but a convergence. Rivers shifted or weakened. The monsoon became less reliable in key regions. Trade networks changed. Urban maintenance became harder. Local settlements became more practical than large cities. Social authority, whatever form it took, seems to have lost the ability or the reason to preserve old standards across vast distances. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the balance of causes, but the overall movement is clear. The Indus civilization ended as an integrated urban system, not as a human population. This distinction matters because it changes the emotional weight of the story. There is no need to imagine the Indus people as ghosts swept away by disaster. They were survivors. They adapted to changing water, changing land, changing routes, and changing needs. But survival came at a cost. To live differently, they had to leave behind parts of the old world. The civilization's most visible achievements became unnecessary and then forgotten. Its cities became ruins before anyone remembered them as ancient. The final mystery, then, is not only what happened to the Indus civilization. It is what disappearance really means. A civilization can vanish from memory while its people continue. It can lose its name while its descendants remain. It can stop building cities while its habits travel into villages. It can abandon writing while preserving stories no archaeologist will ever recover. It can seem dead to history while still flowing into the future in forms too changed to identify. That is why the Indus world continues to hold attention. It refuses the easy ending. It does not offer a last battle, a last king, or a final inscription. It offers wells, drains, beads, seals, riverbeds, pottery skeletons, seeds, and silence. It asks to be understood not as a fallen empire, but as a civilization that adapted itself out of visibility. Its people did not fail to survive. They failed, or perhaps simply ceased to remain Indus in the form the Bronze Age had known. In that sense, the disappearance is both loss and continuity. The loss is immense cities, script standards, names, institutions, and the shared civic order of one of the ancient world's greatest cultures. The continuity is quieter. People moving, farming, remembering, changing, blending, and carrying fragments forward. The Indus civilization disappeared without war because war was not required. Time, water, climate, economy, and human adaptation were enough. The final image is not a burning city but a slow departure. A family leaves an old neighbourhood where the drains no longer work as they once did. A craftsman packs tools that may never again serve the same market. A farmer chooses a smaller settlement near a reliable water. A seal lies unused. A well remains open. A brick wall warms in the afternoon sun. No one knows that a civilization is ending because life is still happening. That is the quietest kind of collapse, and perhaps the most difficult to accept. Long after the last Indus seal was pressed into clay, the rivers kept moving. Rain still crossed the plains in uncertain seasons. Fields were planted, abandoned, planted again. Villages rose where cities had faded. Children walked over buried streets without knowing what lay beneath their feet. The old names were gone, but the land remembered in its own way, holding brick, bead, bone, and silt under layers of ordinary life. The Indus civilization reminds us that the past is not always lost in flames. Sometimes it fades through choices made patiently, reasonably, almost invisibly. People choose water. They choose food. They choose safer ground, closer fields, smaller communities, different routes. They do not always choose to preserve the shape that later ages admire. They choose to live, and so the great cities became quiet. Their wells filled with dust, their drains stopped carrying water, their streets once crossed by merchants and potters, and children sank beneath heat and soil. The script remained on tiny seals, still precise, still beautiful, still unread. It is one of history's gentlest cruelties that a civilization so organized left no clear sentence to explain itself, yet perhaps the silence is fitting. The Indus world was never loud in the way other ancient civilizations were loud. It did not cover its ruins with boasts of kings. It did not leave triumph carved into stone. Its greatness was in maintenance, measure, craft, water, and shared order. Its ending too was quiet. The mystery remains, but it is no longer empty. What happened was not one thing. It was many slow pressures gathering until an urban world changed beyond recognition. The Indus people survived, but their cities lost their voice. Beneath the dust of Harappa, beneath the sun-baked bricks of Mohenjo-Daro, beneath the dry channels and altered rivers, that voice still waits in fragments. A seal in the hand, a well in the ground, a street under the earth, a civilization gone and not gone.